Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. There are a lot of websites promulgating fake news about climate, but none worse than Vox. Here's their latest: 122 degrees for days, the looming Phoenix heat wave that could harm thousands. How climate change could bring the Katrina of extreme heat to Arizona. To live in the 21st century is to live with the threat of weather growing more and more wicked. Droughts, heat waves, and wildfires are growing more intense and dangerous from global warming and rising greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, we're not reckoning with scientists' predictions that worst-case weather scenarios will be more likely and common if we don't change course. Only 41% of the American public believes climate change will affect them personally. Let's start by taking a look at all these psychological games and misinformation they put in these few short sentences. They say that there's a looming heat wave for Phoenix of 122 degrees that could harm thousands. This simply isn't true. There isn't any looming heat wave for Phoenix of 122 degrees, and I'll show you why later. Maricopa County, where Phoenix is located, is the fastest growing county in the United States. People are moving to Phoenix in record numbers because they like the weather there. Then they say climate change could bring the Katrina of extreme heat to Arizona. One of the most spectacularly awful mixed metaphors I've ever seen. Hurricanes and dry, hot southwest desert weather have nothing to do with each other. The point is that they're just trying to create fear. A lot of people died in Katrina and they want to scare people in Arizona. To live in the 21st century is to live with the threat of weather growing more and more wicked. This simply isn't true, as I'll show you in a minute. And their use of the word wicked implies that there's some sort of evil. In this case, it's supposed to be carbon dioxide. Droughts, heat waves, and wildfires are growing more intense and dangerous from global warming and rising greenhouse gas emissions. This simply isn't true, and in fact, the exact opposite is happening. All of those things are actually declining, and there's no evidence tying any of them to global warming or greenhouse gas emissions. Then they use the standard unreferenced appeal to authority. Meanwhile, we're not reckoning with scientists' predictions. When climate journalists are simply making things up like Vox is doing in this article, they use terms like scientists say or scientists' predictions. It's a way to try to get their readers to turn their brains off and simply believe any nonsense which follows in the article. Then they say worst-case weather scenarios will be more likely and common if we don't change course. This is probably the biggest nonsense of all. Americans have very little control over global atmospheric CO2 levels. China and India are building hundreds of new coal-fired power plants, and they're going to continue to do that no matter what neurotic Westerners believe. Now let's look at the actual trends which people in America are experiencing. This is the graph of U.S. precipitation going back to 1895 from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the Department of Commerce. The U.S. has been getting steadily wetter, and we haven't had a widespread drought in the United States in over 30 years, since the summer of 1988. Widespread droughts were very common and severe in the United States prior to 30 years ago, but over the last 3 decades they've become less common and less severe. We had a bad drought in the Southwest around the year 2000, and in the year 2011, Texas and Oklahoma had a very bad drought, but nothing like the widespread droughts from 1988 or the 1930s. In conjunction with this decline in droughts has also been a decline in heat waves. These heat wave graphs and maps are from the 2017 National Climate Assessment, and they all show that heat waves have generally declined since the 1930s in the United States. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because heat waves are associated with droughts, and as we've already seen, we're having fewer droughts now. This is a graph of the January to August average daily maximum temperature at all United States Historical Climatology Network stations. Afternoon temperatures have been getting cooler in the United States since the 1930s, and this year so far has been the coolest year on record. This graph shows the frequency of hot days in the United States going back to 1895. The blue bars are the percent of days above 90 degrees, the red bars are the percent above 95 degrees, and the orange bars are the percent above 100 degrees. As you can see, the likelihood of hot weather in the United States has plummeted over the last 90 years, with this year once again being among the coolest on record. This map shows the departure from normal temperature for the United States going back to October 1st of last year. As you can see, most of the country has been well below normal temperature, including Phoenix. I was living in Phoenix last October, and it was the coolest and wettest October on record there. This map shows the percent of normal precipitation since October 1st of last year in the United States. This has actually been the wettest year on record. And you can see that it's been a very wet year in Phoenix. Because of all the rain last winter in Phoenix, the wildflowers this spring were incredible. And the cold, wet weather also brought 2 big snowstorms to the Phoenix area last winter. I took this picture just east of Phoenix on New Year's Day this year. And on February 22nd this year, Arizona had their snowiest day ever, with Flagstaff receiving almost 3 feet of snow in one day. The ski area at Flagstaff was still open in May this year. That was the first time that's ever happened. I'm going to talk more about Arizona heat waves later, but first let's look at the next claim in the Vox article about increasing fires. This graph shows U.S. forest fire burn acreage back to the year 1916. It's from the U.S. Forest Service National Report on Sustainable Forests. As you can see, forest fire burn acreage in the United States is down 80% since the 1930s. This shouldn't surprise anyone because forest fires are generally associated with heat and drought, which are also way down since the 1930s. The heat wave graphs from the National Climate Assessment show exactly the same pattern as the forest fire burn acreage graphs. Now let's look specifically at heat waves in Arizona. This graph shows every single day over 120 degrees in Arizona at all Arizona U.S. Historical Climatology Network stations. Arizona's 2 worst heat waves occurred in 1896 and 1905. Days over 120 degrees used to be very common in Arizona, but they rarely happen anymore. Arizona has not had one since 1995. So the Vox claim of extended 122-degree heat waves in Phoenix is simply absurd. Phoenix has never been that hot, and the trend indicates that it's not likely to get that hot in the future. This is the heat wave of June 11th to 17th, 1896 at Parker, Arizona. They had 7 consecutive days over 120 degrees, peaking at 126 degrees. And this is the heat wave of July 4th to 10th, 1905 at Parker, Arizona. Once again, they had 7 consecutive days over 120 degrees, peaking at 127 degrees, the hottest temperature ever recorded in Arizona. And remember that no United States Historical Climatology Network station in Arizona has recorded a temperature over 120 degrees since 1995. The worst heat wave in Phoenix occurred in 1974, which was my freshman year at Arizona State University. Phoenix had 18 consecutive days over 110 degrees, a record that's never been matched again. These were the temperatures at Buckeye, Arizona, which is just southwest of Phoenix during that heat wave. Buckeye had 21 consecutive days over 110 degrees from June 11th to July 1st, 1974, topping out at 119 degrees. 1974 was also the peak year of the 1970s Ice Age scare. On June 24, 1974, Time magazine warned of a new ice age. That was right in the middle of Phoenix's record heat wave. Climate journalism is a theater of the absurd and always has been. They were warning of a new ice age in the middle of record heat, and now they're warning of record heat in the U.S. during our least hot year on record. The UK Guardian now prints all kinds of fake stories about global warming, but in 1974 they said, "Space satellites show new ice age coming fast." The worst tornado outbreak in modern U.S. history also occurred in 1974. And Darwin, Australia was destroyed by Cyclone Tracy on Christmas Day 1974. The city was uninhabitable for a year. None of the claims in the Vox article had any basis in science. They're simply making things up, and they abuse the name of science in the process. There's no reason to believe that Phoenix is in any danger of extended 122-degree heat waves, and any scientists who say there is simply don't know what they're talking about. I'm not sure which climate alarmists are trying to do is more disgusting, the abuse of science or the abuse of children trying to scare them about their future. But I'm doing everything I can to expose these fraudsters. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.